Welcome to the Book Binge. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is our February book haul, with haul being in pretty heavy air quotes because there's not actually that much to talk about today, and not going to be probably for very many months in the future, just on account of kind of the way that collecting and stuff is going. And a pretty big factor in this, actually, I'll just go ahead and say it at the beginning here, is after this book haul, maybe after the next book haul, I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head, I'm going to probably go back to doing quarterly book hauls instead of monthly book hauls, just on account of not really collecting very much. Most of the reason that I expanded to monthly once again a few months back was because of Kindle books, ebooks, purchasing a bunch of things like that online on sale, and thus having a large quantity of things to just, rush through, and making quarterly videos end up a little bit too long and arduous to really deal with collecting and recording. So I did monthly for a little bit for that reason, but if you've been anywhere on BookTube recently, you know that Amazon has kind of changed the way that some of their digital, books are handled, and that you can't even download to your Kindles through your PC anymore. So it's very difficult, if not impossible, to end up with backup copies of your ebooks if you're purchasing them through Amazon. That, of course, means that I could purchase things through other means, and I probably will at some point in the future when I can be bothered to deal with that. But in the meantime, I don't foresee myself making that many purchases on Kindle in the growing future, and as a result, the book hauls are going to be a little bit too short to really justify doing them monthly once again. But that's basically all that I need to say at the beginning of this. So I guess the first thing that I can talk about right now is that through Bane's ARC mailing list, I got an ARC of the last book in Larry Correa's Son of the Black Sword series. If that's whatever the series is called, Saga of the Forgotten Warrior, that's what the series is called. I already owned the first 4 books. I still need to get the 5th one here. I now technically have a copy of the 6th one, though probably when I read that, I'll end up, buying one of my own. But that is basically the digital ARC that I collected this month on account of that being a new release recently. Otherwise, I want to show you something that I did mention in the last one of these haul videos, was that I got an ARC for The White Country by Boston Tarrant. At least last month when I mentioned it, I said that it was coming in the mail actively, and that did arrive pretty shortly after that video was recorded. And here's the physical version. So this is actually, I think, the first physical ARC that I've received from anybody, and I'm working on reading it right now. At the time of this video's release, I believe the review for this should be going up in 2 days. At the time of recording, I only have like a week or so to finish this book and get that review ready and out to go so that it can release on the day of its release on March 11th. So that's pretty exciting. Wanted to show that off as my only physical ARC. It's, kind of a not necessarily that much of a milestone, I guess, all things considered, but it is something that I'm pretty proud of nonetheless. The only other physical item for this video is actually going to be in the midst of a very rare unboxing moment for this channel. A book that came pretty hot off the presses here last minute. One that I'm going to be reading pretty soon as a read-along in the Red Company Suneater fan Discord. And looking forward to a film that is releasing this week. Thank you, Amazon, for not putting any packing bubbles in there, but that's okay. Mickey 7, obviously the inspiration for Mickey 17, out in theaters this week. I'm going to be going over and visiting a friend and watching that movie in the theater this weekend. And we're going to be doing a read-along of this over the early portions, at least, of March. I hope to read this in roughly the same time frame, actually, as The White Country, even though I don't have to get it done that quickly, but just based off of timing, that should work. And since it's pretty short, it's like it's not even 300 pages, actually. That should be relatively doable. I had to get the hardcover with this original cover because I like this cover quite a bit, as opposed to the film cover, which I'm just kind of on. Doesn't really excite me very much, whereas this one does. So that's the other physical item in this video. But now, with that out of the way, there are actually no audiobooks that I acquired over this past month. In fact, I actually ended up canceling my Audible Plus membership pretty recently because I haven't been using Audible enough to really justify it. Through that year that I had it in 2024, it ended up being very useful on account of McCarthy and all of McCarthy's stuff, Cormac McCarthy stuff being on Audible Plus, basically. I think the only McCarthy books that I want to go back and reread, I actually own the audiobooks rather than them being on the Plus catalog, so those two I'm not worried about. There's a few other of his books that I might want to come back to at some point in the future, but if so, then I can just collect those audiobooks individually. Nothing, no harm, no foul on that regard. But this isn't a McCarthy video, just basically saying that I don't actually have any audiobook accruals this month. So we're going to move into the ebook accruals instead. So moving back over to my desktop here, you'll see the very first thing I just wanted to give a brief shout to was that I collected like 5 collections of random fantasy anthologies that existed for free that a friend shouted out. He shouted out one of these books. I think it might have been Hall of Heroes, but then I was like, oh, there's 5 of these actually in the series that are free out of 6 of them. So I was like, whatever, let's grab all of them just for the heck of it. Otherwise, most of the collecting here, I'm actually pretty surprised. Not a whole ton of it was free stuff. A lot of it was actual legitimate sales of things that I was looking for ahead of time or was very interested in upon seeing descriptions. First one of these, however, was another free acquisition, The Other Side of Silence, Dodie Bishop. I forget what it is specifically that this one's about, but every time I read the description, I'm like, that sounds cool. So I forget what the description is off the top of my head at this point, however. Next up, we're going to skip down to wherever he is, Pierce Brown, in which Golden Sun went on sale pretty recently. So now I have the first couple of these books digitally to be able to read whenever I want to try Red Rising. I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to buy these books physically or not. There's a good chance I will, but I have the first couple just in case. Next up is Christopher Bielman, who I picked up a couple of books on sale recently. The Black Tongue Thief, which I've heard great things about. I had thought I had acquired The Daughter's War, which is like a prequel to this at some point a few months back, but I guess I never did. Then, of course, the pretty acclaimed, medieval horror type of story, Between Two Fires, that I confess I was never really super interested in this one, but I was always interested enough to maybe give it a shot. So when it went on sale, I picked it up. Next up is going to be a book that I actually talked about in a video I don't know, at this point, 1.5 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago. It's been a while ago, but Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, which sounded like a cool book in whatever book or whatever video it was that I talked about it, but I really genuinely don't remember which one that would have been. Otherwise, I would link it in an iCard above my head here. But yeah, it would probably be too difficult to find that, so I'm not going to bother. Next up is another pretty acclaimed book, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which these two actually ended up going on sale pretty close together, this one and then In Cold Blood. So for a second when this went on sale, I was like, wait a minute, I just grabbed that, and it was obviously a different book. So I grabbed this one. This one sounds good, it has a pretty good reputation as far as I know. And I don't have any reason to believe at this point that it would be bad. I grabbed a couple of books by Blake Crouch here, both Run and Upgrade. So, there's not a whole ton of Blake Crouch books that I'm interested in giving a shot, but Dark Matter, Recursion, and Upgrade, the Pines trilogy, and then Run is one of the earlier thrillers of his that I am interested in giving a shot. So when these two went on sale, I grabbed those to add to the collection. Next up is another book by Umberto Eco, Foucault's, however that's pronounced, Pendulum. I forget what it was that this one was about, but it sounded good, and Eco's pretty well acclaimed as far as somewhat more literary fiction is concerned, so I decided to pick that one up. Next up is Irving Finkel's The First Ghosts, which is kind of like a sort of history of ghosts and the supernatural stuff in Mesopotamian history and stuff like that. So, an interesting concept that I was like, you know what, sure, that would be pretty cool. Let's pick that up. I also grabbed World Without End on ebook because I know at some point here I'm going to read more Ken Follett. I'm going to read more of the Kingsbridge saga. After I really, really loved Pillars of the Earth, having this ebook ended up being pretty helpful because that book is really thick, and I did a lot of my reading in that in December when it was too early and dark, when I didn't really want to have lights on, and when I could read by the Christmas tree, for example, for ambiance, and having the ebook for that really helped. And I want to do a kind of similar thing with World Without End, not least because it's also like 200 or 300 pages longer than Pillars of the Earth already was. So I grabbed that just for my own sanity. I had already owned A Column of Fire from previously before that. Next up is some Maria Franklin's writing inspiration. This was a random, free, very short book that I picked up, writing prompts for all reasons and seasons. I'm like, sure, maybe if I want to do some extra random writing stuff, if I could ever have extra time on my hands, that would be something that maybe I could look at, just maybe for random ideas or something along those lines. Who knows? I have Thomas Harris's Red Dragon, the first book in the Hannibal Lecter saga, I guess. So the one that comes before Silence of the Lambs. Hannibal, of course, is a sequel to Silence of the Lambs. So I now have 2 of the 3 books in the series that I'm interested in, because that prequel I do not want to read at all, quite frankly. Next up was a history book that sounded really good, actually. A Savage War of Peace, A History of Algeria in 1954 to 1962 by Alistair Horn. This very long book, actually, like 940 pages or something like that. I'm like, really? You can write 950 pages about such a brief period in Algerian history? I don't know anything about Algeria, nor not even like what possibly a Savage War of Peace could be in reference to, like what historical period that could be in reference to. That's just my ignorance talking in that event. But whatever it is, like, there's obviously plenty of material to talk about, so I grabbed that. Let's see, next up is going to be another Washington Irving book that I picked up, this one being Knickerbocker's History of New York, which is kind of like it's a history of New York, but it's also like satire and fiction, in that Knickerbocker isn't a real person. It's a, fictional character recounting like a history of New York or something like that. Like I said, there's some satirical stuff to this apparently. So I was like, sure, that sounds like it could be pretty fun. I haven't read any Washington Irving, but these few books that I picked up from him sound pretty good. Of course, Legend of Sleepy Hollow is pretty well renowned at this point in time. See, next up was another random Stephen Graham Jones pickup. Parthenogenesis was one of those like $2 like Tor.com original like novella type things that I picked up alongside several other ones several months ago. So I randomly decided to buy this one recently. I gotta go on another Stephen Graham Jones kick. Maybe if I have time in between reading sessions like House of Leaves in October this year, I'll read some of these shorter like novella, short story stuff from him just for the fun of it. Next up is going to be Barbara Kingsolver's Prodigal Summer. The concept of this sounded good, and considering how good of a reputation Demon Copperhead has, I was like, sure, I'll pick up Prodigal Summer. Ain't no skin off my back to do that. Next up was an author that I had no idea was the author of Carmilla. I picked up Carmilla, seeing a free copy of that. I picked up Uncle Silas like a couple months back, not even realizing that it was the same author as anybody who I would know for any reason. But Carmilla is like a pre-Dracula vampire story, if I'm not mistaken. So kind of funny that I now have a couple books by this author without having previously realized it. See if I could not get lost in my place over here. That would be pretty nice. Jan Martel, I picked up Life of Pi, of course. This is kind of like a bucket list item that I want to read someday, even though I've never like been super driven to do so. There's just kind of a curiosity in the back of my mind that's just like, this seems like it would at least be somewhat good. And of course, I'm pretty sure I've heard good things about the movie as well, so that would be interesting to check out. So I picked that up when it was on sale. Next up was another sale of a absolute juggernaut behemoth, if I could find the author. And There Was Light, which is like a 1,200 page biography of Lincoln. There's a couple of these really big chunkers. A friend of mine, I believe it's Tokyo, I think, who said this, has been reading this one recently and has grabbed her early on. So I'm like, yeah, I'll definitely pick that up. It was just a buck or two for 1,200 pages of this. I was like, yep, let's totally do that. I'm into that. I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about Lincoln. I read a couple books about him and about his assassination specifically back in like late junior high school, and always regretted that I didn't read more of that kind of stuff to actually learn more about him. Next up is a couple more James Michener books because I have a problem when I see these books on sale. Oh, he's right there. I picked up Alaska, which is another one of these 1,500-page historical epics, and then the novel, which I used a lot of the rest of my Kindle credits that I had available to pick up. It's apparently a novel about the writing of a novel, which is funny, but this one wasn't quite on sale enough that I wanted to just pay money outright for it, especially considering that it's only 500-600 pages compared to the 1,000 plus that pretty much all of the rest of these here are. So that's why I used the Kindle credits on it, but hopefully Michener is good. It seems like he has a pretty good reputation, but plenty of these sound like they could be good, so who knows. Next up is going to be Terrence Nunez's The Legend of Jack Donovan, which I don't remember what this one was about, but it's kind of like one of those free Western books that kind of was just on free at one point in time. That I've been kind of in a Western kick as far as book collecting and reading has been going, so this was one that I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds pretty good. Pretty similar thing with the next pickup, Craig Rainey's Hoodoo War, which is a tale of, what is it? The I can't read what that says there. Oh, the Mason County War. I don't know what the Mason County War is specifically, but I decided to pick that up out of interest anyway. Next up is another Alistair Reynolds book, Century Reign. Don't know what that's about, but it's Reynolds, so I grabbed it. Surprising discovery that I made is that Theodore Roosevelt actually wrote some things. I didn't know about this previously, but apparently he wrote a pretty long history of the Naval War of 1812. So that sounds like it could be cool. Apparently his writing actually has a surprisingly good reputation. So I'm like, sure, I'll pick that up when I saw it around. Next up is an author whose name I would absolutely butcher, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Imperial Gateway is like a let's see, it says Colonial Taiwan and Japan's expansion in South China and Southeast Asia, 1895 to 1945. Ironically, this ended up on my radar pretty recently after I had learned a little bit, just a very brief kind of overlook of Imperial Japan's incursions on Korea during sort of that time period as well, and how that's kind of had a ramification through modern history. So even though this isn't about Korea, it seems like, because Korea is too far north to be about this kind of thing, found it ironic that this ended up on my timeline around that time. Anyway, next up is Peter Straub's Ghost Story, which I gotta be honest, I'm not super interested in a lot of Straub stuff, but Ghost Story has a really good reputation, is apparently kind of up there with amongst the greats of horror, so I decided to grab this just kind of on a whim when I did see it for sale at some point somewhere. Next up is a little free collection of short stories here by H.G. Wells, The Country of the Blind and Other Stories. I've read his Time Machine. I have his Invisible Man that I want to read at some point here, but other than that, I don't actually know a whole lot of Wells. Of course, he wrote War of the Worlds, and I should check that out at some point in time, but beyond those three, I don't know a whole ton about his work, but would be interested in reading more, potentially, at some point in time. Next up was Edmund Wilson's Patriotic Gore, which I forget what this one was as well. It was something about Civil War history. I think the concept sounds good. It's kind of similar to one of the first books that I talked about in this section, in that every time I read the description of what this book is about, it sounds really cool and interesting, but I just can't think of what it is off the top of my head right now, so that's unfortunate. But I'm pretty sure that's actually everything in the ebook side that I collected this month. So we'll go ahead and end the video here, I think. Thank you for watching this haul. If you did, again, I think I'm going to go back to quarterly book hauls, just on account of trying to acquire less stuff. I'm also trying to save a little bit of money, and I think that the Amazon decision is going to make that a little easy, ironically. So now I'm going to go back to picking up more physical books, and I'm a lot better at knowing when to not pull the trigger on buying physical books just based off of price, being like, okay, I'm better at following let's say budgetary restrictions on physical books than I am with ebooks. I go over those budgetary restrictions with ebook sales way often, way too often actually. So going back to probably focusing on more physical collecting in the future is something that I would like to do, and I think will end up helping me in the long run for more than one reason at this point. But once again, thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate it. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.